Section 1, Continental Drift. In this section, we're going to summarize Wagner's hypothesis of continental drift. We'll describe the process of seafloor spreading. We will identify how paleomagnetism provides support for the idea of seafloor spreading. And then finally, we'll explain how seafloor spreading provides a mechanism for continental drift. Wagner's hypothesis. Continental drift is the hypothesis that at one time in the past there was a single large landmass. We called that single large landmass Pangea. And the theory holds that this landmass broke up into the smaller continents that we see on the planet today and then migrated to the locations that we find them. As we have studied coastlines of continents, many scientists have discovered that the coastlines look very much like a jigsaw puzzle type shape. And that has led them to hypothesize that the continents may have all fit together at one time. This hypothesis was first proposed by the German scientist Alfred Wagner, and this occurred in 1912. And he used a number of different evidences to support his hypothesis. Wagner used fossil evidence. He noticed that some fossils of organisms that are not very likely to be able to swim or migrate across the great oceans were found on separate continents. That led him to believe that the continents were at one time connected. He used evidence from rock formations, specifically evidence along the eastern seaboard of the United States and the western seaboard of Europe. He used evidence from rock formations that are very similar between those two locations. And on the next slide, we'll look at a picture that helps to explain that further. And then finally, he used climatic evidence. And he found that there were or could have been changes in climate patterns which would suggest that the continents have not always been located where they are currently. So rock formations and fossil evidence were both used to support Wagner's hypothesis. This picture shows along the eastern seaboard of the United States a similar rock formation or mountainous formation as what you would find in parts of Europe and the western portion of Africa. Again, the same thing, similar thing along parts of Sweden and Finland, and then along portions of Greenland. And then also distribution of Mesosaurus fossils in the green, here and here. And distribution of Glossopteris fossils, which Glossopteris is a fern-like plant that is only found in warm climates. Here, here, and here. The evidence that was collected led him to believe that the continents were all at one time connected, allowing these mountain ranges to be formed at the same time in the same location, and these organisms to have populations that are much closer than what they are currently where the Atlantic Ocean separates them. Despite the fact that Wagner had some evidence, he had a missing mechanism. So he wasn't exactly sure how this process actually went about occurring to cause the continents to move to their new locations. Because of that, his ideas were opposed. Many scientists rejected his ideas. Wagner proposed that the continents moved by basically plowing through the rock on the ocean floor. And this idea was shown to be physically impossible. Scientists disproved this idea very quickly. And so Alfred spent the vast majority of his life trying to come up with a mechanism where these plates or these continents were able to move on the surface of the planet, but he was unable to do that. Mid-ocean ridges became that evidence that he needed. A mid-ocean ridge is a long undersea mountain chain that has a steep, narrow valley at its center, and it forms as magma rises from the asthenosphere. Remember, the asthenosphere is that layer inside of the planet below the lithosphere but above the mesosphere. It is a plastic layer that flows, and that asthenosphere would move the continents on top of it, and specifically where these mid-ocean ridges are, it would create new sea floor, especially as the tectonic plates move apart from that central ridge. The evidence that Wagner needed to support his hypothesis was discovered almost 2 decades after he died. So he spent his entire life searching for this mechanism, and he was never able to actually find the mechanism that was later found after he passed away. So, quick quiz. Why did many scientists reject Wagner's hypothesis of continental drift? In science, it's not enough for us to have evidence. We also have to have a way in which the process that we're predicting could occur. We have to have a mechanism that would drive this process. And so many scientists rejected Wagner's hypothesis because the mechanism that he suggested was easily disproven. In 1947, scientists set out to map the mid-ocean ridges. And while they were studying this mid-ocean ridge, specifically the mid-Atlantic ridge, they noticed 2 surprising trends. The first one is that the sediment that covers the seafloor is thinner the closer to the ridge that you are. As you move farther away from the ridge, the ocean floor gets thicker. The second trend that they noticed was that the ocean floor was very young. They noticed that rocks on land could be aged from anywhere from 1 to 4 billion years old, whereas none of the oceanic rocks were more than 2 million years old. And as you got closer and closer to the center of that mid-ocean ridge, the age of the rocks became younger and younger. So summarizing that, rocks closer to the mid-ocean ridge are younger than rocks farther from the ridge, and rocks closer to the ridge are covered with less sediment. So this picture shows that. So we've got oceanic crust, where magma is rising because these 2 plates are moving apart from one another. So new material is forming here as it's cooled by the ocean water. The sediment is really thin in this location, and slowly as this plate pushes farther and farther away, the oceanic crust will get thicker and thicker. In the late 1950s, geologist Harry Hess, he proposed that the valley at the center of the mid-ocean ridge was a crack or a rift in the Earth's crust. This had never been considered before, so the thought was that it was a small crack where the Earth's crust was basically opening up and pushing new material out. In this location, molten rock or magma rises to fill in the empty void space where those 2 plates are pulling apart from one another. This process is called seafloor spreading, and it is the process where new ocean lithosphere is created due to magma rising from the inside of our Earth and solidifying. Hess proposed that if the seafloor is actually moving and spreading and pushing away or diverging away from a central location, that if this was occurring at the ocean, at the mid-ocean ridge, then the plates may be as well, along with the continents. So the continents, they may be moving apart from this central mid-ocean ridge as well. And so he suggested that this may be the mechanism that Wagner was looking for. So as the ocean floor spreads apart, magma rises to fill the rift and then cools to form new rock. You can see where this picture represents that process. So older lithosphere is pushed away. Newly formed lithosphere continues to be created due to those two plates diverging from one another. Quick quiz. How does new seafloor form? Take a moment, think about it. Come to a conclusion as to how new seafloor forms. Remember that typically where there are divergent boundaries, the plates are pulling apart from one another. As the plates are pulling apart from one another, new magma rises and it cools when it comes in contact with ocean water. This creates new ocean floor at the divergent boundary. Paleomagnetism. Paleomagnetism is kind of an interesting science. Scientists that were mapping the mid-ocean ridge started to look at the specific types of rock and the way that the iron-rich materials aligned as new seafloor was created. And they noticed that when the rock hardened, there was a magnetic orientation that occurred in those rocks due to the fact that there were iron-rich materials in the rocks. So paleomagnetism is the study of the alignment of magnetic materials in rock. When we look at the different rocks that are found on the ocean floor, we notice that there seems to be a reversal in Earth's magnetic poles. As rocks solidify, when they were basically created, those iron-rich materials align with the direction of the pull of Earth's poles. Specifically, currently, rocks that are formed are going to be aligned to the North Pole. But as scientists studied these rocks, they started to notice that there was actually a reversal in a lot of the rocks, and it actually ended up in a kind of a banded layers away from that mid-ocean ridge. Scientists call this magnetic reversals. So they've discovered that there are rocks that have magnetic orientations that point opposite of our current magnetic field. So instead of those iron-rich materials aligning to the North Pole, it seems that they align to the South Pole. When we discover rocks that have fields that point to the north, we call this normal polarity. And they are all classified into a single time scale. We also have found rocks that have fields that point south, and we call this reverse polarity. When scientists have placed those periods inside of a chronological order, they notice that there seems to be a pattern of alternating normal and reverse polarity. And they used this alternating normal and reverse polarity to create the geomagnetic reversal time scale. They discovered through this time scale that there is a striped magnetic pattern on the ocean floor on each side of the mid-ocean ridge. And there seems to be a mirror image of the pattern on the opposite sides of that mid-ocean ridge. And so when we draw it out, we get the geomagnetic reversal timescale. this paleomagnetism, or this geomagnetic reversal time scale, seems to support Hess's idea of seafloor spreading. This picture helps to illustrate that. So magnetic symmetry, the pattern of magnetic symmetry and age of rock formation indicate that new rock forms at the center of the ridge and then it slowly moves away. Notice we have the geomagnetic reversal time scale here. We have the rift at the center where new seafloor is being created. The darker color represents normal polarity. The lighter colors represent reverse polarity. So if you notice, the vast majority of the rocks currently, or all of the rocks currently, are aligning to the North Pole. A small strip here aligned to the South Pole, and then it went back to North Pole, and then there was a long period of time where those rocks were aligning to the South Pole. Scientists think that we have actually been in a very long period of time where our rock alignments have occurred for the North Pole, and they actually predict that we should be in a reversed polarity state at some time in the near future. Quick quiz. How are magnetic patterns in seafloor rock evidence of seafloor spreading? So the symmetrical magnetic patterns in seafloor rocks show that rocks formed at one place, specifically at a ridge, and then broke apart and moved away from the center in opposite directions. Wagner redeemed. So reversal patterns on the seafloor could also be found on land, and these reversals in land rocks also match the geomagnetic reversal timescale. Because the same pattern appears in rocks of the same ages on both land and the seafloor, scientists agreed that the magnetic patterns showed change over time. And this idea of seafloor spreading provides a way for the continents to move over the Earth's surface. Seafloor spreading was the mechanism that verified Wagner's hypothesis, so it helped to support that hypothesis of continental drift.
Continental drift is a theory that proposes that continents can drift apart from one another and have done so in the past. 245 million years ago, today's continents were part of one giant landmass called Pangaea. A giant sea called Panthalassa surrounded Pangaea. Gradually, Pangaea broke into two pieces, Laurasia and Gondwana. By 180 million years ago, the North Atlantic Ocean and the Indian Ocean started to form. By 65 million years ago, Laurasia and Gondwana had broken into smaller pieces, and the South Atlantic Ocean began forming. Today, the continents continue to move at a rate of about 1 to 10 centimeters per year. The Pacific Ocean is getting smaller, while the other oceans are getting larger.